Grady, welcome. Great to see you again. How you doing?
I'm great. Great to see you as well. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled about this conversation. I'm thrilled for everyone in our program to get to meet you. It was just a pleasure working with you for 4 years in
Yeah.
Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. So it's great that we've stayed connected, and appreciate you engaging with some of my stuff on LinkedIn and leading to this conversation. So we'll jump right in. Everyone, I want to introduce you to Grady Ligon. Grady was the CIO at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, and he was very actively involved in the transformational deal that we did when I was at Salesforce a few years ago. We worked very closely together. We negotiated the contract, very complex, a lot of people involved. So Grady and I got to know each other over the many years, along with his peer, Chris Stewart, who's the CEO over there. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to get inside the mind of a CIO at a global, well-known brand. So Grady's now at RE/MAX Global, who I use to buy my house. So thank you, thank you, Bill Ruane and the RE/MAX family. And we're going to spend about 35 minutes really understanding what it's like to be a CIO in 2023, what's important, and how reps can position value to CIOs to really become partners and not vendors. So why don't we start off, Grady, if you can just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your current role at RE/MAX to start off, that'd be great.
Sure, happy to. So Grady Ligon, I'm CIO for RE/MAX Holdings, which operates the RE/MAX real estate brand. We have a mortgage franchise business called Motto Mortgage. We have an internal data company as well. We've toyed around with the idea of selling some of that data externally. That's a very long story. And I'm ultimately responsible for all the corporate apps, all the things that keeps RE/MAX LLC up and running. So been in that role for about 7 months now.
Awesome. And you've been a CIO for 15 years, is that about right?
About right. It's coming up on 20. So starting in like 06, 07 with Prudential.
Awesome. How has the CIO role evolved from when you started in, 17 years ago to now? Kind of how has the role evolved?
Well, the things that evolve are all around where the technology component fits into the business. So traditional, what you call IT, is much more around networking and telephony and servers and PCs and all that. That hadn't changed that radically, other than how those services are provided. What's changed is all around the business application side of things, and the fact that business applications are now frequently the business itself. So there's at times zero difference between business leading and technology leading, whereas 15 years ago it was a lot more segmented.
So does this mean the CIO is working as part of the business to enable the business more so before, where they were just a shared service? Is that those lines?
That's pretty good assessment, is that for many companies, the ones who are thinking about technology as a strategic driver or a strategic part of their business, it's not something that is embedded within the business. It is the business. So my role sits alongside the CEO of RE/MAX Real Estate, the CEO of Motto Mortgage. So it's not subservient to, it is part of.
So how is your input or your kind of your goals aligning with their goals? Because when I think they are the business, I think they need to collaborate with the heads of the business units in parallel versus them getting orders of, hey, go set this up or do this. Can you elaborate?
And I think that's one of the really interesting parts. So not to take too much of a divergent path, but RE/MAX has never had a CIO in the 50-year history of the company before me. So there's lots of things there that made sense. They were good, rational, strategic decisions that made sense for one thing at one time. They did not make sense as an enterprise. Mm-hmm. So having that input and insight and being able to contribute that as we're talking through plans for go forward, it kind of changes the landscape of how you think about things versus, to your point, well, I need to go do this, so please set up a server farm or websites or whatever, because we have this purpose in mind.
That makes sense. So looking at, you're coming into a company, Remax, they've never had a CIO. It's been 7 months now. I'm sure you see a lot of disparate applications, siloed data, divergent processes. Kind of, what are you thinking right now, 7 months in terms of strategy and kind of what needs to happen moving forward? Where's your mind now?
Well, 7 months in, I'm finally thinking, I think I understand all of what we have here, because that's taken a little bit just to get your hands around all the components and the people and even the history behind where you got there. So some of the things that I've got to figure out is, as I was saying, there were good decisions made that were tactical that have resulted in there being overlapping technologies, overlapping service providers, way too much service here, way too little there. So there's a bit of deconstructing and unwinding that has to be done before we can put together the solid strategic foundation we need to do all the things that are on our roadmap for 24, 25, and outer years. So there's quite a bit of de-architecting and re-architecting that's going through my mind, at least.
Yeah. So when you re-architect, what are you trying to enable across the enterprise that you can't do with this spider web of cobbled applications and siloed data?
Yeah, it's a variety of things. And primarily what it is making sure that we have a foundation around data, around integration, around how we think about the applications that support our business, like Oracle and Salesforce, for example, that they are positioned in the right place, and that if I need to move, so if I need to move from Oracle Fusion to a bigger version of Oracle, that I can do that without it being a 2-year project. So there's a lot of integration architecture, for lack of a better term, that I'm trying to put in place to limit not our exposure, but our reliance on any one vendor system technology, because as things change, decisions have to change along with them.
Yeah. So enabling agility, enabling innovation,
absolutely
avoiding vendor lock-in, so to speak.
Right. Because we have some strategic vendors, and they're fabulous vendors with wonderful people and great products in 2023. I have no idea how that's going to look in 2025 or 26. And they may still be great, and that would be perfect. But if they're not, I need to have us in a place where we can make a change without it being major upheaval.
Yeah. So what I'm kind of hearing is one of the focuses of CIOs is to standardize the technology stack to enable innovation and elasticity. What are kind of some of the other top priorities for CIOs in 2023 right now?
Well, I mean, anyone who tells you that cybersecurity and risk management's not on that list is lying to you, because that's a huge priority. And the biggest challenge with things like cyber and risk is you never see the payoff for it, because the payoff is silence. So you don't, it's much like buying insurance. You never want to benefit from those dollars you paid, but you want to know that if something goes wrong, you've got it covered and you know what your action plan is. So cyber is huge, huge among them. And we've got a bunch of things on the plate for that for 23, 24. So other than that, the rest of it is how we strategically enable our businesses to operate in the landscape that we're moving into, with large language models and GPT sitting out there. Where do we go with that? What do we do with that? How do we enable people to do things that they're going to want to do while having some sort of common sense guide rails around them to let us not be in a dangerous place? So it's this balance of moving as fast as we need to move with putting some rational guidance around it so that people don't do things unintentionally that end up being dangerous.
Yeah. So I'm hearing kind of like 50%, maybe 70% is making sure you protect the business, making sure you get the stack with the right tools and governance, and then 30% staying ahead of what's coming and incorporating it into kind of whatever's next. Is that
right?
Is that a fair breakdown, or is 30% too generous of looking forward?
With where we're sitting right now, I don't know that 70% of my time is risk mitigation, but it's probably close to 50 embedded within all of the moving forward stuff.
Yeah, because you still have to evaluate solutions. You still have to,
of course,
you have to understand what pulling out one technology is going to do to the rest of it. You still have to assess, and the assessment for anything can take a long time. And
it's not trivial.
Yeah. And so let's talk about, I always say executives are super busy, right? And especially
that's correct
level, and you're running around. What does a day or week in the life of Grady Ligon look like realistically for people who are trying to get the attention of the CIO?
Well, I mean, overall, the things that fill my calendar that frankly get moved all the time anyway are one-on-ones with the rest of the executive team, one-on-ones with my directs, executive team meeting, and my team meeting. Those things have permanent homes on the calendar. The rest of it is either looking forward with business initiatives and things that we know are there, or reacting to something that's come up that we have to deal with on a legal or compliance basis, or this new technology's come out and we've got to deal with it. So it's full of really good, and it's all good stuff. So let me just start with that. But the good stuff of connecting with my team and with my executive team, because that's 100% critical. And then next layer down is team meetings where we can get together and talk about stuff together. That's great. The rest of the stuff, the reactive piece, ends up being challenging because those are the things that you can't move as freely and as easily. And that's the times when I'm not traveling to a conference or something, which is far more frequent than I'd like it to be.
Yeah, my motto is just say no. Unless I have to be there, I try to minimize travel. So I hear you on that. It's
as do I. This one I was at this week, wasn't even last week. I got back yesterday. Was, leaders in the real estate industry. So I need to be talking with them on a regular basis too, because while they're my competition, some of them, we're all playing in the same space, and we all have, kind of a duty to this industry to be doing the right things by customers and by the people we all employ.
Makes total sense. And it sounds like, just kind of taking a step back, the point is you're extremely busy between internal meetings and, industry knowledge. So given that the bulk of your calendar is kind of already spoken for, how does a rep, well, first of all, taking a step back, like what type of outreach, let's just say reps are tasked, many of them are tasked with meeting with CIOs across the strategic platforms, across cybersecurity. How many sales reps do you even get reaching out to you on I'd say a daily basis, typically? I'm curious.
It's a lot when you include the ones that get caught in the spam filter and I don't see. Every few weeks, I'll just look through all the ones that got blocked. And I would say 2/3 to 3/4 of that list are legitimate people trying to sell me things. Now, there's things that I don't need or want, or some of them don't even apply to my business. But email is so easy to send, but it's also so easy to ignore that I have no clue what the hit rate is on email, but I would imagine it's low.
So given that email probably doesn't even reach you, what are some two-part question. What are some effective ways that sales reps can get the attention of a CIO himself? And number two, what is the messaging that would need to be included to actually make you want to take a meeting given your busy schedule?
I'd say the easiest and probably the most expensive way to get these meetings is go where they are. So this conference I was at this week, the only vendors there were strategic vendor partners. It was not a sales meeting. So that is definitely frowned upon at that one. But there are many other ones, depending on the industries that you're working in. that have lots of time and places to catch someone and have a 10-minute conversation, that those things are absolute gold.
And I'll give you just an example of this. Berkshire Hathaway Home Services had their annual conference, right? One was in Texas, the other
a couple weeks ago. Yep.
Another one was in Las Vegas. I was there at both of those, and even before we became a vendor, and that's an opportunity to catch up with the brokers, to bump into all the executives. And that was a playbook I used for enterprise accounts consistently, is go to their conferences if you can, get a speaker and have a speaking agreement. We had Noah Flower come speak at the conference in front of the marketers. So that's a great playbook. What about capturing the attention? What is kind of some of the effective things, looking back at sales reps that reached out that you said yes to? What are some of the things you can think of that grabbed your attention or stood out for you?
The times when I'll say yes to a meeting that's not like an in-person meeting where I already am, all has to do with me having a need and them being able to address that need. Because, as we were talking before this, nobody likes to be sold to. They simply don't. But there are many times when I need help with a decision. And if there are people who can step in and meet that need, fabulous. That helps tremendously. So knowing my business, knowing my industry, knowing, where we're going and where we've been, that gives lots of leverage as to how to craft a message that would resonate at a particular point in time.
So when you say knowing my business, knowing our industry, knowing about us, can you elaborate a little bit more?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So if you're trying to sell me solutions that are financial service solutions, I'm not going to be listening to you. I will tune you out in the first minute, because it'll be very clear that you don't understand that I'm in the real estate industry. If you're trying to sell me real estate brokerage solutions, I will tune you out, because it's clear you don't understand that I'm in the real estate franchising business. So there's lots of particulars that I would say fairly cursory research would let you understand what my business does, which can help you understand better what my needs are.
So when you talk about needs specifically, if you already have a need and you're probably already talking to the class solution provider. So is there a way that reps, or we'll say strategic partners, can introduce you to unknown needs, things that maybe you weren't thinking about that could be top of mind in any situation where they say, hey, this is what, have you had that happen when you think of?
I have.
Okay. What does that look like?
I have. So I was at a conference with my last company and was just talking to someone about, a need we had. This was brokerage. This wasn't franchising. And they said, hey, have you thought about the idea of having NFTs tied to physical properties? And I'm like, that's interesting. Tell me more. And so they introduced me to, another vendor that they work with. And we had a long conversation. It didn't go anywhere because I'm not convinced that that's the future, but that could be the kind of things that really do spark is when you've got a connection. And when you know what's going on in an industry and have an idea about the future. I talked to a guy at a convention not long ago about the idea of having personal neighborhood referrals. So if I'm moving into a house, well, if I can know something about the people who live in that neighborhood, that'd be great, especially if they want to volunteer that information. Now, there are all sorts of privacy problems there, all sorts of problems with fair housing if you know too much, but those kind of things, understanding where I operate and being able to at least speak to it does create lots of opportunity.
And lots of trust, I imagine, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So going kind of along that path, we teach here, if you want to have somebody ultimately respect you and trust you, teach them something about their business that they may not already know.
Right.
Bring
Right.
insights to them that they might not be thinking about, and then ask if they'd be open, to learning more or having a conversation about that.
Right.
How does that approach kind of land with you?
That always works well, because if you can either show me that you know what I'm doing, speak to me about the challenges of aggregating MLS data from 450 MLSs. At least that sentence buys you credibility that you understand the business I'm in, because now I'm probably listening to you differently than if you just start talking like you think all MLS data is the same. So those kind of things go a long way to letting me know that you've done some work, even if you haven't worked in my industry. You know enough and you care enough to have done some work to know how to speak intelligently about business problems I may or may not have.
Yeah, and one of the easy hacks, I think, and if I was selling to Remax and I was selling, let's say, a web chat or a messaging platform or something similar to Marketing Cloud, I would go on and try and raise my hand and see if I could find an agent. And I
absolutely
how fast they responded back, what that communication was, what was said, and I document it. And then I would say, hey, here's some ways that your agent could connect with these leads and use texting and ensure that no lead gets left behind. For example, would you be open to sharing about it, Grady, and see what your reps are actually doing? I'll share my experience. Would you be open to a meeting like that if I approached you?
Right. I would say that would be a far more impactful way to address it than saying, hey, I've got this chat solution. Would you like to learn more about it? I'm like, no, I don't think so. Thank you, though.
Because every other person, and you probably have a chat solution somewhere.
Well, yeah.
Right. But
yeah,
you have, it's how it's being used and what the customer experience is. And if you can come as a customer or someone who's kind of gone through that and show me that you know me, right?
That's right.
Going to, just from a sheer effort in standing out, they're going to give you some response. Maybe it's not a meeting, but at least it'll give you some response versus sounding like
right. It's like walking into a job interview and not knowing anything about the company you're interviewing with versus being able to speak to them intelligently about what you think their challenges are in the next few years.
Absolutely. So do your homework, prep, show me you know me, and just do your best. Now let's pivot a little bit to the actual meeting. So I get your attention. I stand out. I get a meeting with you, Grady. Tell me kind of, we call it imposter syndrome in sales, right? And imposter syndrome is this idea that executives are superior or, in some way intimidating because of their title or stature.
Right.
Or whatnot. And again, I teach the opposite. I teach this human to human concept of selling, but it's hard for a lot of people. So, I mean, what you beat with execs all the time at Remax, and Berkshire, I mean, kind of tell me what it's like on the other side when you meet with a rep that may be nervous or just really kind of looking up to you, what that feels like as a customer, and what really resonates and connects on the other hand that reps do.
Right. At least for me, people looking up to you and trying to impress you is creepy and off-putting. And, I want nothing to do with it. Generally, my advice to anybody trying to sell is just relax. We're both people. We both have the same basic needs. Now, my business needs are a whole nother story. But if you've done some work and you know generally what I'm doing, generally what my business does, you have a place to start having a real conversation. And if there are other places where there's connection, because again, we're human beings living in the same world, then we have things to talk about other than just business. And then you've got something that probably goes a lot longer. It's why you and I are still talking versus it being transactional.
Yeah. And I just say, be authentic, right?
Agreed.
Grady and I are both Christian, and we have a connection around, the way we live our lives and values. And I posted something and he reached out and it immediately resonated. Same thing on the music side. Anyone here play guitar, right? I mean, how much more connected do you feel just seeing all the guitars behind behind you. We're all human. We're all humans. Baylor Bears.
We are.
I was
Yeah.
texting Grady when Baylor was playing football and thinking of him because that's what I think of when I see Baylor. So
Right.
be a human and talk to people as humans. So let's talk about meetings that, assuming you got a good connection, what are some of the mistakes reps, the common mistakes reps make when going to that first meeting with you?
The most common one I see is you walk in selling. You walk in like you've got a solution, you know the problem, and you've got a solution for it. And that's really difficult because no matter how much research you've done, you probably don't know my specific needs as well as I do. So I would say walking in with a solution generally is a bad idea. Walking with an idea of what a solution could be, totally different. The ones that have gone really poorly are when someone walks in and starts telling me what I need versus listening to me and asking me questions.
So just being presumptuous and pitching, essentially.
Yes.
And what about the ones that have gone really well?
The ones that go really well always start talking about something other than business. Just making a personal human connection, and then start talking through what they have observed or researched or seen and opportunities that they see. And then saying, does that resonate? Does that seem to match what you're seeing as a business problem?
I'm just patting myself on the back right now. I'm sorry to say, but I'm teaching. We're in the Impactful Executive Conversations. That's why you're here this month. We're in the middle of this. And I said, start with rapport. Find something interesting about them. Share your point of view as a hypothesis and ask them if this is something that resonates or is top of mind. And if not, what are the other priorities? It's literally a framework that we talk about. So thank you for validating. And no, I did not coach Grady. We did not talk about any of this stuff. So it's really cool to hear that actually resonates. So asking questions, so building rapport, asking questions. What about like at the end of the meeting, you got a great, connection, you want to pursue it further. What are some things reps can do to make it easier on you? Because you're busy, you go back to what you were doing before.
Right.
What happens after that meeting to keep the momentum and make sure that a real opportunity is actually created, a real deal is starting?
Well, I would say if you're expecting me to follow up after the meeting, it's not going to happen, probably. So following up as soon as possible afterwards and making sure you summarize what we talked about as briefly as you can, that always goes a long way. Because I try to take notes during most meetings, but that doesn't mean I'm mentally digesting all of it, especially when you're hopping from one thing to the next. So, just a reminder of what we talked about and where we talked about a real opportunity, always great.
So Grady, one of the things I've seen, and this was common, even with Berkshire, we had Mike Fortes and we had Sue and we had other people. I wasn't working with the execs, you and Chris, on a day-to-day basis. How important is it to have a right-hand person that you can depend on to kind of shepherd and run some of these projects and make sure they're moving along on both sides?
Mm-hmm. Generally, once you're past the idea stage and it's something where I've gone, yeah, that's something that makes sense. Let's go ahead and start, fleshing this out. That's when I'm going to give it to, either my VP over the Remax stack or over Motto Mortgage, or maybe even one of their product managers. And that's where, I hesitate to say the real work, but that's where the real work of a project happens. I'm not, pulling levers and making things happen at a project level. I'm just getting you to the right people to actually make the things happen.
Perfect. And what do you want to know afterwards from the vendor? What is the communication you expect to see once it's handed off? How do they keep in line with you?
That all depends on the project and how emotionally involved I am in it. Generally, what I want to know is, are we on track? Do we see any impediments in the future? Is there anything that's holding you back now? And do you see any other opportunities which might dovetail in with what we're talking about?
Perfect. So let's continue. Fast forward. We sized it out. We scoped it. It's going to fit with the stack. There's a pretty good business case. I know that's still just the beginning of you having to get it approved. Let's say it's a multi-million-dollar type of initiative. What does a CIO have to do to sell this internally? What does that look like, having gone through this quite a bit?
Well, if they know what they're doing, they're starting to sell it from the first meeting. So they're not waiting until it's all fleshed out to say, hey, here's this new idea. It's already fleshed out. We need to sign this contract. We're starting to sell from the moment that we think there's a need and we think that there's some sort of fit. But when you're down to the point of getting things truly approved budget-wise and signed, that's all selling. And much like if you're selling to me your software solution or whatever, if I'm not doing the same thing the same way with my executive team, it's going to be a problem. So it's a process that has to start very early.
And I have two more questions along this thread. Number one is, what can reps do to empower you to effectively sell internally?
Have tangible results, numbers available. I may or may not need them, but having them available is always handy, because if nothing else, it shows that you're prepared, which goes a long way. And if I do need them, then that's great. So I would say that's always helpful. And then if you've done the research and know my industry, being able to at least point in the direction of where this idea, project, solution, what have you, fits in terms of strategic priority and the way the industry is moving, that helps as well.
Perfect. And let's just say that you need to get your CFO and your CEO and your COO on board. Are you trying to sell this on your own to them in internal meetings, or do you want to sell it co-sell with the actual partner together and bringing them in front of these other stakeholders?
It kind of all depends on the size and scope of the thing. And frankly, it depends upon the individual CIO's relationship with the CEO and the CFO. If there's a deep trust relationship, I don't need a vendor partner to help me out with that. But if you're new, or if it's just, multiples of millions that are way outside the scope of anything you do, then bringing other people in to continue to validate what we're talking about is very helpful.
And let's talk about money for a minute.
Yeah, because it comes down to that.
Let's talk about money. So let's say, realistically, let's call it multi-million-dollar big strategic projects.
Yes.
Are most of these budgeted, or do you have to go and show the ROI and get the money from the CFO that wasn't necessarily pre-budgeted? What's kind of your thought on pre-budget versus finding budget for projects that have a strong ROI and actually help advance the business?
Generally, they're one of two things. They're either a known need that is already budgeted, and we're just trying to figure out, how to solution, or it's an opportunity that's arisen based on one of these conversations that we're now thinking, okay, I should probably act on this, but now I have to figure out which other pieces of my strategic priorities I pull money from to make it make sense to do this now versus waiting until the next budget cycle.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of going, is like, I've seen a lot of strategic deals where people rob Peter to pay Paul, but it's still
all the time
budget neutral. Can you elaborate on that? Kind of how does that work for a CIO?
That happens all the time. And, as a leader, your job primarily is to allocate scarce capital. There's only so many hours in a day, only so many people on your staff, only so many dollars in your budget. And figuring out how to correctly allocate that stuff to do the best thing is really the job. Mm-hmm. So if you have to put in, a new CRM for your franchise agents, and you think that adds tremendous ROI because it'll help them do more deals, it'll add more to your bottom line, then you're not going to be afraid of pulling some money from, say, a new website solution or a new back office piece to put into that, because you think that's now a more time sensitive thing and it'll start to drive more money, but it happens all the time. I've never gone through a single year where what we budgeted at the start of the year is exactly how we spent the money throughout the year. It always moves.
Rob Peter to pay Paul, you guys.
Always. And it's easier to do that generally with CapEx versus OpEx.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, so now we're kind of at the finish. I have two more questions, and then we're going to open it up to everyone.
Okay.
So we're at the finish line now. You're bought on. You got meetings with the CEO to sell it, CFO. You're going through your process. Yet, I'm an Oracle rep. Not picking on Julian or other people at Oracle. I'm an Oracle rep. It's end of quarter. They're getting me pressure to pull it forward, but you got your process. What are some things at that kind of last 5-yard line that reps can do that can just screw up the whole deal? And what can they do to actually help it be a win-win on their timeline and getting you what you want, but maybe a little more unnatural than the board meeting that's in 2 months? Can you help us out here?
The things that screw stuff up is putting pressure on someone. Because again, nobody wants to be sold. And if nobody wants to be sold, they sure don't want to be sold in a high pressure situation. You know, you get the fight or flight response and you're not going to like either of them. So that's, kind of what not to do. The only thing that I see that is really beneficial, valuable, and works is be transparent. Say, hey, the end of the quarter is coming up. We have incentives to do these things. Are there anything we can do to move this up? And try to either sweeten the deal, change how the deal gets paid. I mean, anyone who has a personal connection with someone else is usually willing and desires to help them out, as long as it makes sense all the way around. So transparency goes a long way, really, in every relationship, but certainly in this type of relationship. And
only if you've earned it, right? And if you're
correct,
if you're fair about it and say, hey, I don't want anything unnatural. Dallas did this really well, if you recall.
Yes.
You don't want it to be unnatural, but if you're able to, it is the end of the quarter. We want to incent you. If there's any way we can sign, is that possible? And here's what we're able to do. We'll get you, some dream
exactly
or whatever. And then let me see. You'd probably say, let me see what I can do.
Right? Exactly. Right. And that's the thing. If you have a honest, transparent relationship where you trust each other, everybody wants to help everybody out.
Yeah, because it's going to be a long-term partnership.
Yeah, exactly.
Last question. I know it's been a few years since we worked together, but we had a very complex deal, a very close relationship. I'd love just to share your experience kind of working with me and the Salesforce team during that transformation, what it was like on the other end as a customer to go through that experience.
Oh, sure. And generally, it's been all the things we've been talking about. It was personal connection. It was transparency, being clear about the fact that you're talking to Chris Stewart, you're talking to Mike, you're talking to me, you're talking to multiple people in our business, because that's a sales tactic, which makes all the sense in the world, but B, because they all have insight and input into what we're doing. So being open about things makes no one question your motives, and it helped tremendously in that deal. Bringing other resources to bear, like Noah and Dallas and the other people you brought in to bring more perspective, to bring different options to the table. And then when we start talking about the big elephant always in the room, the money, again, being as transparent as you're allowed to about your margins, what you're making, and, how things work. Because, I think I've told you these exact words before, is I don't mind you making money off me. I don't, because if you don't succeed and I'm using your product, then we both fail. But I don't want to be gouged. I don't want to pay something that I consider unfair.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember it like it was yesterday. We had DeBrage working with Steve Ladd on a business case together.
Yep.
We had the Ignite team running design workshops. We had David Beard and legal working together.
Absolutely.
You and I were negotiating the master agreement, and you brought in Gartner.
Yes.
To
absolutely
size up our agreement. And you told me, hey, we can get this uptime. It was a 99% and we were at 95, and you brought that, and you said some other things about
Right.
it was a renewal rate increase that we had at 10 that went down to 3. I mean, I remember it was like yesterday, and I told you, this is what we can do. This is what we can't do. I'll fight for you. I'm glad you're doing this. And did it feel like I was working with you to get this done?
Always, always. That there did not feel like there was any animosity or any, manipulation going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the key, you guys. It's just a matter of being transparent and having a relationship where
It
you
is.
can tell me from a place of pure, not strategy, but reality. I brought in Gartner. Here's what they told me, X, Y, and Z. Here's what your contract says. What can you do? And I'll say, I'll go see and come back.
Right.
And here's what we can do. There wasn't a ton of back and forth 20 times. I mean,
No,
it
wasn't like buying a used car where you got to go talk to your manager and then, that goes back and forth 5 times.
Yeah, that should be the easiest part. All the work is the work.
I agree.
When you get to the contract, it moved quickly. You should not be 2 months in legal. So
Agreed.
So anyway, I'm going to open up the floor, Grady. I could talk to you all day, but I want to take some questions. So we have some order here. If you can raise your hand using the reactions button, and let's turn it over to Yagna. Go ahead, Yagna. Ask your question.
Hey, Grady. It was a pleasure getting to hear your experience in your world. I'm curious, you said in Remax's 50-year history, they've never had a CIO.
Never.
So coming in, you're laying down new brick, right, to get where you're going. What does that look like for you in terms of how success is calculated and measured for you? How did you set your goals coming into the role, and how does that change now?
Well, there's a lot on the table. And so really for me, the thing that I've got to be able to show in at least this first year is the places where this role adds more value than not having it. And that's very easy, just because, like I said, lots of one-off point decisions that weren't bad decisions, but they don't make sense as an enterprise. So goal 1 is being able to articulate the particulars of that. And goal 2 really is around finding and being able to show to the board the places where we were overspending, because, and not for any malicious reason, but because we had 3 different decisions to use AWS, to use Azure, to use Elastic for things that were essentially the same process, and being able to have a standard and solid architecture for our position going forward.
Perfect. Thanks, Grady. Let's go to Carolina.
Hi, Grady. Nice to meet you. I'm Carolina Chavez. I work at SAP and I support enterprise businesses there. Something that you said that stood out to me was managing technology architecture and, coming in as a new CIO in a brand new position as well, and realizing there's just duplicate technology across the board. And there's a lot of different ways that you can streamline things. That's a common trend that I see with almost every single one of my customers.
Yep.
So I'd love to hear what your approach is on it, and also how you prioritize, given that I'm sure that you likely have hundreds of applications.
We do. So first step for me is to get my team to be able to give me a diagram, a visual with all the applications that we've got, where they get their data, and then what business functions they support. Because without that, it's a rather arbitrary discussion. And then once we've got that, now we can start talking a little more intelligently about, well, what should this look like? Because now you're seeing that we have 4 different things doing this one business function, but they're all supporting the same functional need. So we've got to make some changes there. So really that's where it starts, is being able to see the landscape.
Thank you. That makes
You're
sense.
welcome.
And I think the second part of that question, Grady, was prioritizing what changes after that.
Yeah, prioritizing is the tough one, because it's really a matter of urgency versus importance. Because we have some stuff in our landscape that's pretty urgent based on, legal compliance, regulatory stuff that we do need to get in order, at least have the right plan around. But then we've got other things that are truly important because they affect ROI, they affect our ability to address forward-looking things. So prioritization, it truly is an art. There are 13 to 1,000 ways you can do it. And just having a framework is probably your best first step.
Terrific. Thank you, Carolina. Great question.
Thank you.
Let's take Julian next.
Hi, Grady. Thank you for sharing everything. And I wanted to say I'm Julian, and I work in sales over here at Oracle. One of the questions I have, as you know, you're a CIO, and is an article I read on LinkedIn about how business transformation projects get funded and approved. And one of the things that came up in conversation between you and Ian is something I'm confused about. Is it looked like the consultants like Accenture, Deloitte, most of those projects are being funded, and most of the attention is put on them, versus like the vendor, the supplier, like a salesperson. Is that something that you've dealt with, through your career mostly, or no?
I've seen it both ways. The big consulting firms have it down to a science. They know how to get in, because they almost always have some sort of relationship that they leverage to get the ear of the people who are doing the prioritization and the funding. It makes it so much easier for them to be spearheading this and then bring in Salesforce or Oracle or SAP as part of their solution. And this is another challenging thing. Having spent time in the energy and investment banking industry, I can tell you that people look at consultants as being more objective than they do vendors. So that's the other piece of that puzzle. May or may not be true, because I've worked in the consulting world, and I can promise you it's not always objective.
So what I heard there, Grady, is consultants often have a line to power where funding decisions are
Absolutely
priorities, and they just go direct, which then will skew more money going their way in that article as it's described.
That is correct.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's take Morgan next. Hey, Morgan.
Hey, Ian, how you doing? Nice to meet you, Grady.
Good to meet you.
So, Grady, I had a question. You talked briefly about projects that you've sold internally and whether you needed help from sales reps or not, but I'm sure you've also been on the other side of the coin where like other teams internally, they have these needs, they have ideal vendors, and then they have to pitch internally and go through you to get approval. I wanted to ask about what maybe internal teams that have been successful selling ideas internally have done going through you versus maybe others that haven't.
Generally, the ones who are more successful start the conversation earlier in the cycle, before they have a solution, before they have a vendor, before they have a technology. They start the solution with a question of, hey, I have this need. I need a email marketing platform for the mortgage franchising business. That's so much easier than saying, hey, I want to implement Salesforce Marketing Cloud for this, and here's why. Because the question doesn't presume that they understand all of the complexity of the business, where things may fit, where dollars may lay out. And it's just like we were talking about in the sales approach. If you start with a need and a question versus a sales pitch, you're almost always going to end up with a better result. The ones that don't work well are the ones who come in with this fully baked thing. Well, I need this product to do this because of this. And you start looking at them sideways like, did you not even think about the fact we've already got two products that do that exact same thing? And why on earth would I work with this one company that I've never heard of because you think they meet your niche needs? So I hate to keep boiling this down to simple things, but really, the approach that always works best is making connection, asking questions, and listening.
Awesome. to that point, I want to ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
Do you have people on your team competing for resource and funding that come up to you and you're kind of looking at them, which project makes the most sense? Or is that not a reality of an executive? Because that's what sometimes we tell people.
Of course it's, I mean, everybody is competing for attention because like I said, the money I budget going into 23 versus the money I have spent at the end of 23, they're never on the same things. So that means that throughout the year, you're always subtly or drastically shifting priorities and what you work on. That happens almost daily.
Amongst your team too, amongst people in your
Oh,
team.
absolutely. Amongst my team, amongst the business leaders, all throughout the organization.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's take Nick next. Nick Weaver. Nick,
Can't hear you, Nick.
We can't hear you, buddy. I think it's your AirPods. Still can't hear you.
Still nothing.
I'm going to switch to Javed. We'll take you next, Nick. Go ahead, Javed.
Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Hi, Grady. Thanks for your insights today. I mean, and speaking of Baylor Bears, I was an RG3 era bandwagon fan.
Outstanding. Happy to hear it.
And the new stadium, it funded it. So I had a couple of people in my close circle who went to Baylor for the undergrad and stuff. I do have a question for you. Like, how do you think about, like, when you did speak about the consulting and they having a straight line to power? How do you think about like using the Big Four versus a boutique shop who's very specialized in a particular problem, and kind of like how do you when do you choose one or the other kind of stuff?
That's a really good question. It's a tough one to answer because the Big Four have tremendous depth of expertise in several areas. If I've got a large scale, very complex problem, I'm probably going to lean on their expertise. If I have a very narrow but very deep problem, I probably don't want them because they're not as nimble and they tend to have a very set way of looking at things. So if it's a niche, deep technical thing that I need solved, probably not going to Accenture or Deloitte or any of those guys. I'm probably going to someone who specializes in, geo-targeting mobile applications.
Yeah, thanks for that insight.
Certainly.
Let's try to take Nick again.
Yeah, are you able to hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So Grady, thanks for speaking with us and love kind of the piece on cybersecurity. I feel like you can speak to a lot of that just given some time, doing it on the consultancy side back a couple years back. But I had one question, but I want to shift a little bit because to Ian's point, you kind of mentioned, hey, what you have for budgets at a given point of the year at the start, where that spend is completely different. You've worked with so many reps like Ian before in the past. What have the best reps done that you've worked with that have made it to where if they're speaking to you about something, that priority kind of stays still front and center?
That's good. It's a hard question too, because I'm not sure that what the rep does is changing the priority of my needs as much as it is being aligned with the fact that is a need and that is a priority. And really continuing to ask, is this still top priority? Because as priorities shift, there's nothing wrong with saying that has gotten deprioritized. Let's talk again, in the next budget cycle.
Okay. So really more on that like transparency and just having an open line of communication with them.
Right. I still think that will solve so many problems. And even if things aren't a match and you can't get a deal done, people are still going to remember you. And when they have a problem, they'll probably give you a call.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Certainly.
And I think, Nick, to add to that, because priorities change, because you never know if a CEO is going to change, if a company is going to get acquired. If you are aligned with the priority, it's critical to have a timeline that's mutually agreed upon and next steps so that it doesn't turn into a long thing and all of a sudden, right? Time kills all
Agreed.
the other priorities. So it's critical when you are aligned to have a tight mutual plan that you both can stick to so that other things don't change and, in too long in the future. So
Definitely.
so move
Thank
when there's priority. Let's take Mog next. Hey, Mog.
Hey, thanks, Ian. Grady, nice to meet you. Quick question from a vendor perspective. How big of an uphill battle is it maybe for a CEO to make a decision if they are biased towards a competitor? Like you've used vendor A at your previous company and you know it works, but then you're working with vendor B and it's like, how much time is vendor B really supposed to be putting into it if you've already biased towards it and you know the other solution works?
If you know that that's in place, I wouldn't try to fight that uphill battle. I did a project rolling out an ERP for one of Enron's subsidiaries long ago. And our CEO of that division had worked with one of the ERP systems and had a bias against them from day one. We ended up going with Oracle because it was almost a predetermined conclusion. And I told the rep for SAP, I said, do your due diligence. Don't knock yourself out because I know how this ends.
Got it. Thank you.
We got time for one more last question and then we'll say goodbye to Grady. Sia, go ahead. You're it.
So just kind of backpedaling right to what you said. Kind of curious, when C-level does change and you're reporting to like the the CEO or whomever it is, how does that impact you and your day-to-day and getting things done?
Well, there's a little bit of turbulence there because there's this little bit of get to know time, especially if you're bringing in a CEO that is unknown to you. So you've got to figure out who you're dealing with, what their priorities are, how they operate. It's the same thing. It's a sales cycle. It really is. So we're going through that. We're doing a CEO search right now. We have an interim CEO. We'll have a new CEO sometime this year, and we'll be dealing with that. Yeah, I wish there was an easy answer to that, but there's really not because it's getting to know a whole nother person.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Grady. I just wanted to just say on behalf of our whole group, it was really wonderful to hear your perspective. And it just shows, I hope it shows to everyone that Grady is just like you and I. He's just a human, just trying to do his best and do his job. So
absolutely,
treat executives like you would your friends and have a conversation and don't try and ditch the pitch, try to help, listen, and let the rest take care of itself. So
amen.
We appreciate you, Grady. You're just a breath of fresh air, and I'm so happy you got to join the group today. Thank you so much on behalf of all of us for coming in today and sharing.
All right. You're so welcome. Happy to be here anytime.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, y'all. Bye-bye.